Cannabis Control Commission to order at 11 a.m. on April 27th, 2018. Can everybody hear me in the back? Great. Is anybody recording this meeting? As people are recording this meeting, let me put the public on notice that this meeting is being recorded. Can I ask everybody please to put their cell phones on silent or shut them off? Thanks. Let me go through the agenda. We called this meeting, as I think you're all aware, really with one agenda item, which was to continue the discussion of the investigative services contract that the executive director has recommended for our approval. There were some issues that came up in our last conversation on this topic on Tuesday, so we agreed to convene today to discuss and hopefully get to closure on this issue. As such, the normal course of the agenda we're just not going to cover today. We'll have our normally scheduled meeting on Tuesday, but there'll be no approval of minutes, no executive director report, no statistics on applications and on system performance. But we do want to take advantage of the fact that we are meeting in public to continue the process of approving applications for priority certification. So we have added that to the agenda. The executive director and the staff have prepared a set of batches recommending both approval and denial, and we'll go through that. And then we'll come back into the conversation about the investigative services contract and see if we can get to closure on that. That's it for the agenda. I suspect it'll be a relatively short meeting. With that being said, Mr. Executive Director, let's go through the recommendations on certification before we talk about the contract for investigative services, if that's all right?
Sure.
And I'm sorry just to interrupt. I've taken what you circulated to the commission and broken it into 4 batches. So I've broken it into a batch where the staff recommended approval, where the entire commission can vote on it. There is a second batch that the staff has also recommended for approval where Commissioner Title has a conflict, so she'll recuse herself from that. And then the same thing for the certification of the applications that the staff has recommended for denial. I've broken those into 2 because, again, Commissioner Title has a conflict with one of them. So that being said, Mr. Executive Commissioner Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you indicated, there are 2 proposals or 2 batches today. One is for approvals. These are entirely economic empowerment applicants. The first for approval is a total of 28, but as you indicated, there are 2 that have identified potential conflicts with the
Which I have as batch 2 up there.
That's correct, yep. So these are economic empowerment applicants that, based off staff review, has been recommended for approval. From a data set standpoint, a point I'd like to make is the last tab, so when this gets posted to the public, folks can see, or to the website, excuse me, later on this afternoon, folks will see the dates submitted. Some of those dates do fall after the deadline for submission. The reason for that is that application has been reopened and since been resubmitted to the commission. So that's I guess.
So the original application was submitted before the deadline.
Was submitted timely to the commission, has since been reopened by staff. Supplemental information had been provided and is therefore now before the commission for approval. So that's why that date may indicate a date later. What it also indicates as well is that from a staff management standpoint, we are in these applications. They're kind of assigned out or doled out to staff in a timely basis as far as when submitted to the commission. So that interaction may indicate a later submission date, but it's because we've been interacting with the applicant directly.
Great.
So there are 28 for your approval. There are 26 within the first batch that staff has been through and is confident that they meet at least 3 of the 6 criteria. We would therefore recommend approval of, in this case, the first 26.
Any questions or comments on the first batch 1, which all 5 commissioners are able to discuss and vote on? Have a motion to approve batch 1.
So moved. Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Flanagan. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Let the record show the commission unanimously approved batch 1. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the second 2 are the same process or same category, which is staff has engaged in review or evaluation of these 2 applications. The applicant themselves have identified a potential conflict, and therefore they have been separated as a batch of 2, also recommended by staff for approval.
Any questions on batch 2? Then we'll do a voice vote here since Commissioner Title will recuse herself. So can I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Let the record show Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner McBride. Commissioner Flanagan? Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Abstain.
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman? Aye. Let the record show that these two applications were approved by a vote of 4 in favor. Commissioner Doyle, Hoffman, Flanagan, and McBride, and then Commissioner Title abstained. Thank you.
Next up, Mr. Chairman, is a batch of a total of 13 applications. As you indicated, there was one that had identified a conflict. These are applications that were filed, unfortunately, late. So therefore, given that they were filed after the deadline, the staff recommendation is that they therefore be denied. Again, there's a total of 13. There is one, however, that has identified a conflict, so the staff recommendation would be on the 12 listed in batch 3.
Great.
Would therefore be before the commission with a recommendation for denial.
Any comments, questions?
Yes.
Commissioner Title?
I think that if they came in after the deadline, they should be denied. However, I wonder if we specified a time zone when we set the deadline at midnight, and if not, if we would consider accepting the ones that came in between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. Eastern Time.
We did not specify a time zone. I think that would be before the commission for consideration. However, I think all of our materials to date have been posted with perhaps an assumption that Eastern Standard Time would apply. That would, based on the data points we have here,
How many would that include, do you think?
as I'm looking at it now, about 7 of the 13.
Any comments on Commissioner Title's proposal? Sorry.
I'll go.
Good.
Nobody else.
I was thinking rules around court filings.
I want to play poker with her.
Rules around court filing, you know.
Oh, really? What are
that's
those?
standard. Well, so I mean, in the I think it's like in the jurisdiction that the court exists.
That's the time zone?
I don't know if anyone can hear.
Go ahead.
So I mean, I think that it's a standard that in the, you know, if you're doing a court filing jurisdiction that the court exists, the presumption is that it's the time zone for the court.
Yeah,
Commissioner Dunn.
I commend Commissioner Title for her kind heart, but I tend to be sort of the opinion, if you want to do business here, you should do business here in this time zone, you know? That's just kind of where my gut is on this.
Commissioner Flanagan?
No.
Okay. I don't think there's any need to continue the conversation then.
Mr. Chairman, I'm also trying to identify as far as an address listed by any applicants, if any of them are.
On the West Coast?
I'm not able to kind of fully ascertain that at this point, but I'm aware that there were less than a handful that would be from jurisdictions from an address provided standpoint outside of Massachusetts. Food for thought.
Do we need a vote on this, General Counsel?
Well, I don't think we need a vote on it to the extent that it has not been moved. The
Okay.
question, yeah.
It's okay? Great, then can we go back to batch 3, which staff recommended denial. Again, this is for the entire commission, since there are no conflicts.
So moved.
Second.
Let the record show that Commissioner Doyle made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Flanagan. All in favor of accepting the staff regulation to deny these applications for priority certification?
Aye.
Let the record show that the commission unanimously approved the denial of, or accepting the staff recommendation. Batch 4 is just one, which again, Commissioner Title has been identified as having a conflict. So the other four commissioners will vote. Mr. Executive Director.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, same process. This individual application was filed after the deadline of midnight on the 15th. So therefore, the staff recommendation is to deny the application. There has been a self-identified conflict by the applicant, and therefore it is batched separately.
Any discussion? Motion to accept the staff recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
I'll let the record show that Commissioner Doyle made a motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner McBride. Commissioner Flanagan? Aye or not?
Aye.
Commissioner Title?
Abstain?
Commissioner McBride?
Aye.
Commissioner Doyle?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman? Aye. Let the record show that the staff recommendation to deny this application was accepted by the Commission on a by 4 votes. Commissioner Doyle voted aye, Commissioner Hoffman voted aye, Commissioner McBride voted aye, Commissioner Flanagan voted aye, Commissioner Title abstained. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as previously done or completed, these applicants will be notified as soon as we return to the office both lists, both batches posted on our website. And again, just as a friendly reminder, this certification process, approval or denial does not prohibit or exclude anyone from pursuing a license eventually, in which case there is no filing deadline per se. So hopefully folks that we will have engaged with the denial are not disenchanted about the process. I think our intention is that folks get into the system. So we will.
And we'll have another batch to review on Tuesday in our regular scheduled meeting.
There are folks working on applications as we speak.
Okay, great. Again, every time we do this, I just want to acknowledge the hard work of the staff processing these and doing so in a very timely manner. So greatly appreciated for the staff that are here. And I think important to recognize the reason that we only have a relatively few number of staff people here is because they're back at the office processing applications, which is appreciated. The next agenda item is going back to the conversation that we started on Tuesday, which is the proposal from the Executive Director to approve the contract with CSI for investigative services. Mr. Executive Director, if you could bring us back up to speed.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as discussed previously, the Commission published an RFP to procure a vendor, or to secure a vendor for investigative services. The PMT interviewed a number of applicants, reviewed each of the submitted responses and proposals, interviewed a number of applicants, and the unanimous recommendation of the procurement management team was to engage in contract negotiations with Creative Services Incorporated. They are a Massachusetts-based company that is actually based in Mansfield, and they are also currently the vendor for the Department of Public Health for their investigative services, as well as a number of other state agencies. And this is an area that they have a great deal of expertise in or experience. We have engaged in those contract negotiations. The draft contract that was proposed for the last meeting, which will occur on Tuesday, remains. There's been some, obviously, discussion or clarification around the extent or the depth of that check. However, the contract by and large remains exactly intact. So the recommendation is for the approval of the contract, and we're happy to answer any questions that may occur. We also have with us today the Commission's kind of program manager for this specific contract, or the individual within the Commission that would operationalize the contract, which is our Chief of Investigations and Enforcement, Yao Jibi, and he's also available to answer any questions you may have around both the contract as well as our intentions or plans once this contract is implemented and operationalized. So he or I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
I don't have any questions. I would just make a motion that we adopt the staff recommendation on the contract.
Are there any questions or comments before we take a vote? Ask for a motion.
I'll second the motion.
I have a comment. So I had some concerns about the media and social media search. I had the opportunity to discuss the search with the vendor yesterday. I want to thank our general counsel for setting that up, and also to discuss the search with our Chief of Investigations and Enforcement. Given that Yao has considerable expertise on this matter and comes to us from the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, I'm going to take his recommendation to heart that we do need a social media search. However, I suggest that we limit the scope of that search, especially given that this is a policy that will be in place after our staff and our commission. And I don't have any strong feelings as to whether this policy is in the contract itself or separate as a policy. My suggested compromise language is that the search for,
Check with, I can put that up if you want.
sure, the search for owners slash people with controlling interests, so table 2 in the contract, would be changed from social media search to a social media search of publicly available information for criminal conduct related to disqualifying offenses under our regulations or violent conduct, and excluding information related to the applicant's opinions, private life, or social life. And the rationale here is that we have spent hours thoughtfully describing what the disqualifying offenses should be. And so if we were to do a social media search that could flag virtually anything, I think that would undermine those discussions. I'm also concerned about our manpower in terms of our investigations and enforcement team and all they're tasked with applications and licensing, the seed to sale data that they'll have, everything that they're tasked with, to give them a bunch of unnecessary information from people's social media is my main concern. And so that's why I suggested this limited language.
Mr. Chairman, can I have
Yes.
a clarifying question?
Sure.
Is this a policy that's being suggested, or is it part of the contract? Because it's my understanding the contract expires in 3 years.
I think that we've discussed both options. From my personal opinion, I think we can do it either way, but, so I think that's something that we need to discuss, whether if we are comfortable with this language, or at least the intent of this language, whether we want to put it in the contract or just establish it as a policy of the commission. I don't think we've made that determination yet.
But just a follow-up, but if this is proposed contract language, then my assumption is that it's going into this contract. If we do a policy discussion, that's when we reopen the regulations later on.
Well, I'm not proposing to change the regulations because there's nothing about social media searches in the regulations, but as far as this clarification, I don't have any opinion on whether we clarify it in the contract or separately.
No, because
Go
my
ahead.
question is, if this is for this, then it expires in 3 years.
Correct.
So that means we're gonna have this conversation again
Yeah,
in 3 years, which is unfair
Yeah,
to
I agree.
applicants now versus later.
I agree with you, Commissioner Flanagan. My preference is to not put it in the contract. I agree with Commissioner Tittle, by the way, on in terms of the spirit of what she's proposed here, so let me make that clear.
Okay.
My preference is to not put it in the contract for exactly the reasons that you just articulated. I'll show my lack of being a lawyer by saying it doesn't seem to me that we're changing the regulations here. To Commissioner Title's point, that this is not in the regulations. I just think this is a statement of policy on the part of the commission, which I don't think requires us to rewrite our regulations. That's an opinion, not a fact. But that would be my preference, because I want this to be enduring. If we all agree that this is the right thing to do in terms of the spirit, then I think it should be enduring, not something that expires at the end of the contract.
So as a follow-up to that, my concern is if this is a 3-year contract and we have commissioners here who have 3-year terms,
Yep.
then you have new commissioners reevaluating this in 3 years.
So
So it doesn't necessarily mean the spirit will continue.
So what
Given
are you
the fact
suggesting
that
then? I'm sorry.
3 out of 5 of us will be here after 3 years. Because some of us have 4-year terms, some of us have 3-year terms. So
Some of us have 5-year terms.
That's later. But I'm just, it's continuity. My concern is continuity. I will say up front, I don't agree with this. I think whatever is public is public. And I mean, I've lived in a fishbowl. I know the background check I had to go through to get this job. I think that, if people are posting on a public venue, which is social media, then it's up for a discussion. But having said that, my concern is continuity.
So what I appreciate, I hear that and I understand and agree with that concern. Do you have, how would you address that concern?
It's not even, my concern is that it says proposed contract language, so that's why I get back to the point, if it's in this contract.
That was bad language, that was bad choice on my part.
Okay.
So but how would you address the continuity issue?
I mean, you'd have to go into when we reopen the regs and have that conversation, I would think, but I'm not the attorney. I don't, let the lawyers figure that out.
I actually think that we should kind of separate these conversations a bit, because I think that we can take a vote on the contract, because there seems to be some indication that the language may not be appropriate for the contract, which I agree with, but that it may be something that's appropriate as a matter of policy
Right.
with how the information is used as part of the process. So if that's kind of what's on the table now, I would suggest that we move the vote, we take a vote on adopting the language of the contract, and then if we want to continue to have this conversation about the policy piece of it, then I think that we can continue that today, or we can continue it whenever we think that that's appropriate. I guess I would. That's at this point in time. I would say, can we move the vote, take a vote on the contract, and then engage in a conversation about the specifics of the language that are there.
I agree with you, they're separate, and we should separate them. I'd like to just ask your thoughts on the sequence that you propose, which is that, and I'm speaking for myself personally, not for any other commissioner. I'm happy with this not being in the contract if it's policy. So therefore, voting on the contract without this language before we've agreed on whether this policy, I think, gets it backwards for me. If that makes sense to you.
Can I chime in?
Sure.
So there is a motion on the table now.
Yeah.
So we have to act on that motion to proceed, unless you want to amend the motion, vote on the motion, amended motion, and then go back again. Because we're supposed to follow these procedures, and I think I think it's helpful. I think sometimes it gets confusing when we sort of spontaneously change motions mid-conversation.
Change it. Okay.
Well, we would if we had a motion and then suddenly in the middle of discussing that motion made a different motion on policy, which is what I understood you to essentially be proposing, because you were saying one couldn't be voted without the other.
Good.
I would respectfully request, and you can decline, if you would withdraw your motion so that we could discuss the statement first, because how that statement would go would affect how I would vote on this contract. But if you'd like to move ahead, that's fine.
I'd like to. No. I'd like to move ahead with the motion, and the reason that I say that is because I take the view that this language is a relevant policy conversation, and that one that we should have. But I think that we shouldn't be any contract that we are engaging in. I don't think that a contract with a third-party vendor should be determinative of the policy that the commission is adopting with how we use the information that we are asking the vendor to provide to us. And I think that it's not just in terms of this contract, I think that's in any contract, that we as a commission are the policy-making body. What we have before us is a contract that was negotiated by the staff making a recommendation to us that this is what they think the terms of the contract should be, what we're paying for. How we use the information that then comes into us, I think is a larger conversation that should be embedded in policies that we have to develop when we're receiving that information, and when we're asking the staff to make further recommendations to us based on the information that they're getting. I mean, the way that I view all of the things that are in this contract, the specific provisions that are carved out here, is that they're tools. We may use some of these tools. Many of them are going to have to, because they are specifically included in the regulations, but a lot of these tools are going to be things that we have in place so that the people that we've hired to do jobs can do their jobs. So I think, if I could ask Yao, I mean, do you view the media and social media search as a tool?
I do. This is my past experience in terms of me being involved in law enforcement, that social media and media search are productive and vibrant in terms of gathering information. Now, I agree with the commissioners. I don't think there's much of a difference in conversation in terms of what would be our practice in terms of how we use information. I actually think, me listening to this discussion, that all the commissioners are pretty much saying the same thing, and I agree with you, Madam Commissioner, that that's a larger discussion, and, you know, I look forward, I'm sure General Counsel, we look forward to having that discussion, because it's extraordinarily important discussion, but I'd just like to emphasize to the commissioners and to the executive director that we are a new industry, and we want that industry, we want to send a strong signal that we are going to be vibrant regulators, and I think that we all benefit from that. So obviously, as commissioners, I defer to your judgment, but that's the opinion that I have, that there's nothing there that's been negotiated in the contract by General Counsel that strikes us out of industry norms, and I would hope that it would not vote against anything, that any tool that would, you know, challenge us in terms of making sure that we have, you know, vibrant individuals that will participate in.
I'm gonna just interrupt for a second. So I think that, again, I return to the motion that's on the table is to adopt this as the contract, but then if we want to have a further discussion about the use of tools that, you know, we have provided the Chief of Investigations and Enforcement and presumably any staff that we bring on, that and how those tools get used, I think that that's a really valid and relevant conversation. But I don't think that it's appropriate in the contract. So I would, again, just assert the motion to take vote on the contract.
Could I add to that real briefly?
Sure, please.
The other thing I'd like to say is it might be nice to put the discussion of this, which Commissioner Title and I talked about extensively, as part of a larger policy development on the suitability committee and how the background check is reviewed. So it's not just this one issue about social media, but also overall the entire policy.
I think that makes sense. So let me, do I need to ask for a motion again, or is the motion formally
Nope,
made?
I still have further discussion.
All right.
So just to draw the distinction, I'm aware of the difference between the contract versus our internal policy in how we use the tools. My suggestion is related to our contract with Creative Services, Inc. in terms of the information that we are asking them to gather and send to us that we are paying for as a service. The social media search and the media search were not included in our regulations. Therefore, the suggestion that I was making is that we do not ask CSI to gather and send us that information. That's different from the way that we would internally use the information that we do get, which I agree is an internal policy discussion separate from the contract. That said, I'm ready to vote.
So, Commissioner Doyle, you made the motion, is that correct?
Commissioner, I seconded.
Would you just re-articulate the motion, if you wouldn't mind? The motion is just to approve the contract?
The motion is to approve the contract as has been negotiated by our general counsel with CSI, a third-party vendor.
And that was seconded by you, Commissioner Doyle?
That was.
So let the record show that Commissioner McBride made the motion to approve, seconded by Commissioner Doyle. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Let the record show that the motion was carried by a vote of 3-2. Commissioner Doyle, McBride, and Flanagan in favor. Commissioners Title and Hoffman opposed. Motion carries. Believe there is no further business in front of the commission, nothing that I was not aware of when I posted the agenda. So there being no further business in front of the commission, I am adjourning this meeting as of 11:30 on 27th of April. Next meeting will be Tuesday. Thank you. I appreciate you doing that all the time. Tuesday, I'm sorry, I've got the slide. Tuesday, May 1st, 10:30 a.m. back at the Gaming Commission. Thank you very much. I think